So last week I made a video for Rife magazine in response to the Mayfest programme, and I made it about death, and you can watch it right here. This video is going to be a response to actually going to see some other shows within the Mayfest programme. So the first show that I went to see was How to Disappear Completely by Itai Erdal, and I've definitely said his name wrong and I apologise. Essentially this show was quite a moving account of his mother's death and the time leading up to it. It was interjected with moments of complete hilarity, which was brilliant because that's generally how I deal with these things. There was one point within this whole performance that I nearly cried, and that was because we were being shown some footage of his mother effectively on her deathbed, and that was reminiscent of the time when I watched one of my family members die, and by die I mean literally take their last breaths and die before our eyes. And so that really got to me a bit. Other than that, I thought it was absolutely brilliant. It was also quite interesting that my friend next to me questioned, or was at least dubious about whether he'd been telling the truth the whole time, whereas I was unconcerned by that entirely, but it did make me question whether you guys believe everything that I tell you. Especially about all these stories about death and stuff. I mean, it's quite, I don't know, do you believe me? But I think this is a question for theatre in general and somebody far more qualified than me. Moving on. I also went to see Salt in the Sugar Jar by Nikesh Shukla, and this was far more intimate. Firstly, because instead of the theatre space, this was actually done in the front room of a house in Bristol. I was with about 15 other people crammed into this living room, and we talked amongst ourselves, we talked with Nikesh, and we ate. It was ridiculously nostalgic, and like I said, we were being immersed within these memories that then became our memories because they were so strong. And this all emphasised the breadth, I guess, of people's lives and the size of the hole that they leave behind when they die. But again, this was also punctuated with joy and laughter. It was real, man. I don't know what I'm saying. The final performance that I went to, but also the most interesting, was the Death Cafe, which is pretty much as it sounds, like a normal cafe, except everyone goes there with the intention of talking about death. I sat down on a table with complete strangers, a couple of whom were my age, a couple of whom were 3 times my age, and that was a really brilliant juxtaposition because we talked about everything and our differing opinions on stuff. Questions were like, what are you most worried about when it comes to death? And my instinctive immediate response was that there was nothing else after death, whereas the old guy that I was sat next to was concerned about the pain. And there were people there who were more than willing to talk about their own death, and other people who couldn't even consider the possibility that they were going to die. There was also this wonderful moment, and I was talking to this lady about the music that we wanted at our own funerals, and she clearly had absolutely no idea who Beyonce was. It was hilarious. But that itself also made me realise that I've actually become quite self-centered when it comes to death. Like I was thinking about my funeral in terms of me rather than the people that I'd be leaving behind. And that is something that I concluded with in my own video last week, but had failed to apply it to myself. In some kind of conclusion, my video had exactly the effect that I wanted it to. I told people that I wanted it to be a conversation catalyst, and it really was. And it was just so obvious to me that a lot of people want to talk about death, they just don't feel like it's right, or they're not given the opportunity, or they're still clinging onto these weird, I guess, traditional values when it comes to death about shutting up and keeping silent. I kind of feel like in modern society we are finally getting to a point where we are open enough to talk about death and it's not a scary subject to broach. I feel like Mayfest itself has done that quite brilliantly. During and at the end of every performance I went to, people were open and were reflective, and it was brilliant. It made you feel better to talk about death, especially with the Death Cafe, with the younger people that I was with. We are so much more open to talking about it, and it was almost like educating these older people. I spent quite enough time talking about death recently. However, if you would like to talk about death, that is more than okay. Comment below, talk to me in real life, tweet me, whatever. Let's talk. But I'm going to go and live my life now. Goodbye.